Hello and welcome. I'm Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching this special episode of the Business Today show. The G20 Summit is being seen as India's moment and Prime Minister Narendra Modi's push for a new world order. 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister gave his first interview on the G20 to Business Today. The conversation focused on India's presidency and the agenda as 20 of the world's most powerful leaders converge on Delhi. As president of the group, which commands 85% of the world's economy, Prime Minister Modi is looking at India being a catalytic agent for a new global order.
Less than 12 hours to go before global leaders start flying into New Delhi for the G20 Summit. The Indian capital has been beautified. Renovation work being carried out at a frenetic pace across the city is nearing climax. All for the G20 Summit this weekend. It's a mega event which will showcase India as an emerging economic superpower, with recent data and reports hailing it as a force to reckon with. And it is this resurgent India which was the centerpiece of the exclusive Business Today interview with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The Prime Minister spoke at length about the impact of India's G20 presidency on the global ecosystem. In a no-holds-barred conversation with the top editorial team of Rahul Kanwal, Siddharth Zarabi and Saurabh Majumdar, the Prime Minister laid out the enabling role India is playing on a range of issues. The big takeaways from the over 40-minute interview is the way G20 has changed under India's leadership. To emerge as the voice of often sidelined Global South, according to the Prime Minister, the summit will bring developed and developing countries together for the first time to find solutions to global problems. The Prime Minister has also pushed for the inclusion of the African Union into the G20, emphasizing that India and India's G20 will act as a catalytic agent for the new global order. And India is combining its G20 presidency with its growing economic clout to make its tryst with history. The task is difficult and fraught with urgent issues that require global attention. Countries across the world are trying to repair the damage from the twin shocks of the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war. The world is also adjusting to a new normal of slower growth, higher inflation, widening socio-economic disparities, and extreme weather-related events. According to the Prime Minister, the G20 is being looked at as a ray of hope by the world. The ground for this is being laid during India's G20 presidency. The Prime Minister warned that there are forces taking undue advantage by catalyzing the debt crisis and capitalizing on the helplessness of other countries and leading them into debt traps. This is being addressed under India's presidency via debt restructuring and helped countries like Sri Lanka, Zambia, Ethiopia and Ghana. The exclusive interaction at the Prime Minister's sprawling, tastefully done-up office in 7 local landmark had the Prime Minister dressed immaculately and looking relaxed. He spoke passionately about the opportunity India has to help address areas of global concern, India as a potential manufacturing hub, and much more. The PM exuded confidence that India was ready for the next phase of economic growth. He listed out the mantras which he felt will power this next wave. Vocal for global, Atmanirbhar Bharat, zero deficit and zero effect among others. Adding that global manufacturers were coming to India, unfolding an era of unprecedented job creation. According to the Prime Minister, domestic consumption remains strong and with every indicator looking up. Economic growth was bound to be strong. With companies like Tesla lining up for an entry into the Indian market and Apple raising its bets on India, the Prime Minister highlighted the effectiveness of the ease of doing business measures taken by the government in the past few years. saying that massive investments by these companies showed the increasing attractiveness of India as a manufacturing destination. Bureau Report, Business Today Television.
And joining me to discuss this is Gautam Chikarmane, Vice President of the Observer Research Foundation. We're also joined by Ambassador J.K. Tripathi, Subhash Garg, former Finance Secretary and a senior policymaker, also on the show with us, Saurabh Majumdar, Editor of Business Today. Welcome to the show. Saurabh, I'm going to come to you first to quickly set the context for our viewers. The key takeaway as far as the economics of the G20 is concerned that we understood during our interview with the Prime Minister. Saurabh.
Thank you, Siddharth. You were with me and we had a pretty 40-minute plus long meeting with the Prime Minister. And it was a very relaxed Prime Minister. We saw a person who was clearly in control of the situation. He was looking forward to the G20 Summit and he was explaining to us what are the key contours of how he sees this G20 Summit playing out. Now, one of the key elements he says is very dear to him, which is that he wants India now to be the voice of the global south. And that's something he has stressed repeatedly in the course of the interview, Siddharth, as you know, in the sense that he says whether it is the reform of the multilateral development banks, whether it is generally taking forward the development agenda of the world in a sense, he wants India to be at the front and center of this and be the link between the developed and developing nations. And he says this whole Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the slogan which he has coined for this particular G20, what he's talking about in this interview, he says there is no Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam if we do not carry the developing world with us.
Gautam Chikarmane, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and China having problems with that. Given the politics, and we'll leave that aside for on today's show, will the G20, in your view, Gautam, help global business look afresh at India once again? It's not as if global business is not in India, but will it sort of reaffirm the relationship between global investors and India as an investment destination?
I think in India as an investment destination, or the fact that FDI is coming in, or the fact that India is likely to become a large market, is a future that has already happened. G20 will only further consolidate it. The fact that companies are coming, FDI is at its highest, even FII, which is foreign institutional investments, are at a highest. India is the growth story. Wherever you look, it is the fastest growing economy. It has been for the past few years, and it is likely to be so for the next few years. So I don't see India getting out. By the way, 40% of the global growth is going to come from India. So despite being only a $3.3 trillion economy, India is punching way above its weight in global affairs. Having said that, India is not an easy place to do business. The biggest problem of corruption, etc., remains. But I don't think G20 can do very much. In fact, Siddharth, G20 is an ultra macro institution. I don't think a specific company will get any takeaway, a direct takeaway from G20.
Okay, before I go to the other two guests on the panel, I want to bring to you viewers a small slice of a conversation that we had earlier with the G20 Sherpa, Amitabh Kant, at the Business Today India at 100 Summit, and then I'm going to go to my other guests.
One is when G20 started in 2008, the developed world was contributing over about 75% of the global GDP. The developing countries were contributing only about 24-25%. If you look at it now, the share of the developed world has come down very radically. It's about 55%. The share of the developing countries has increased very substantially. So the share of the developing countries is going up, the share of developing countries is coming down. What is happening is, as the IMF has rightly said, this year 80% of the global growth is going to come from the global South countries. The global South is going to contribute to 80% of the growth. And in the next 2 decades, two-third, and it's quite incredible, two-third of the growth is going to come from global South.
That was the G20 Sherpa talking about the economic part that we need to focus on. And Ambassador Tripathi, coming to you as someone who's seen foreign policy being made, one of the key things of foreign policy is economic heft. Clearly, India has a lot of economic heft, but will that heft translate into achieving some of the ambitious objectives that we have set for ourselves? Debt relief, for example, the reform of the multilateral banking system. What do you yourself expect, Ambassador Tripathi?
Well, I think there are a few things that India can think of, which India will take from this. One is from multilateral multilateral banking. Yes, we might be able to pursue the world that instead of big banks or monopolizing banks like US banks, maybe a small type of banks. Floating a small type of banks might be a better idea. Second thing is, which I feel is more important, is the digital financing, digital transactions, which India is a champion of. Right now, only I think less than 50 nations use digital transactions, and we can probably pitch in here to pursue to have some sort of system by which we can increase this dependence on digital transactions. Third thing is maybe startups combined with international collaborations, so that they can share knowledge, and maybe with the help of startups we can achieve better economic growth globally. So that's what I think.
Okay, Subhash Garg, I'm coming to you now, and the question is very simple, and try and make it easy for our audience. Will the G20 summit, especially happening in India and the amount of time that we have invested in this presidency, can it help improve our trade and opportunities and the investment opportunities in the broader context?
In respect to the economic agenda, the Indian presidency put out certain things very clearly, that they want the multilateral institutions to be further capitalized. They wanted some agreement on debt relief, because a good part of the world is facing the high indebtedness. They also thought that the digital payments is one area where the world cooperation can enhance. There was also some talk about cryptocurrency and all. So these are, to my mind, the specific agendas which the government of India wanted to sort of pursue and take forward through the G20 India presidency.
Let's now hear what Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had to say about the economic agenda of the G20.
Global financial ecosystem and responsible financial ecosystem cannot happen, again, without global collaboration. Multilateral development banks and their reforms are also being discussed, and high-level expert group's recommendations are being discussed in the G20 under India's presidency. Similarly, global debt distress. Countries are in deep distress, not just less developed countries, but middle-income countries as well. That affects the global financial architecture as well. Even discussions on debt distress under Indian presidency are happening in the G20.
What the Finance Minister really is telling us, viewers, is that the key priorities are centered around certain issues on which we don't know what the possibility of an agreement will be. Gautam, I'm coming back to you. There is some doubt that the Ukraine conflict could derail some of the important economic items that the finance minister and India has been pushing through this G20 process. Be that as it may, do you yourself expect some movement forward on the key economic part of the agenda?
Yeah, I think the conversations will go on. For instance, the reform of multilateral agencies, which is an idea that began in 2008 itself, when Dr. Manmohan Singh as Prime Minister had floated that we need the reforms of IMF and World Bank. The fact that it is still at an asking stage and not a reformed stage shows that over the past that many years, nothing has changed. So there will be further push, but that's it. Of course, between 2008 and today, a lot of water has passed, and India has a far larger clout. But that doesn't mean it can push its way through. It will have to persuade. Persuasion to persuade whom? It will have to persuade United States, and it will have to persuade China. These are the two, United States in particular. Will the United States go back and open out? They have made sounds to that effect. Will other countries be able to finance and increase their share in these multilateral institutions? Right. I have my reservations on that. India is ready, but I'm not sure if other countries are. So I think these reforms of the multilateral, agencies will continue, right. And I don't think we are going to see any conclusion in the Delhi communique.
Okay, Ambassador Tripathi, do you share that view that Gautam Chikkarmane just expressed?
Yes, I do, because I don't think it is going to be that easy to do whatever they are expecting. I mean, it's not a magic wand. It will take time, and it will take persuasion, and a lot of persuasion before some tangible result could be seen. So yes, this will be a work in progress, which might take years. I don't know how long, but certainly it will have to be done. And certainly Bretton Woods institutions need a thorough reform, because they don't seem to don't seem to be ready for the needs of the poor nations, for the needs of least developing countries, or even middle-level developing countries.
Absolutely.
You have seen what IMF terms and conditions, what Pakistan is suffering is partly due to IMF terms and conditions.
Well, you could also make the point that China is the sort of big bear in the room, and its BRI has compounded economic problems for many countries in this part of the world. Subhash Garg, it's not as if just India's agenda is coming under pressure due to various things like the Ukraine conflict and China itself. That old demand for a tax on the super rich has not gone anywhere for years now, Subhash Garg, you will agree with me. Given that, what should we be satisfied with as far as the economic part of the G20 deliberations is concerned?
See, I think let's get first this thing out. Okay, Ukraine's Russian conflict has geopolitical implications, and it has in a way upset the political agenda. I don't think it affected the economic agenda much. The economic agenda is affected by more now the world economic conditions ecosystem becoming too polar. Chinese pole has risen quite a lot. And that is what is making the global economic agenda more fractious and more difficult to sort of converge ahead.
But what about inflation? Subhash Garg, isn't inflation a concern also for advanced economies now? And shouldn't they be weighing in more to try and ensure that inflation doesn't come back up like we saw in the recent past?
So the inflation did come because the supply disruptions thanks to the COVID-19 and also partly the Ukraine-Russian war. But that phase is over now. Most of the advanced countries are also seeing a substantial reduction in inflation. Today, the inflation is not that big a problem globally. even domestically, what we see the inflation is on the retail side, on the food inflation and all.
Right.
We also have a wholesale deflation right now. So I don't think inflation is a big global problem at this moment.
Okay. Saurabh Majumdar, coming to you, and the last word on the show to you, we started with you. Would I be correct in saying that the G20 at this point of time is a very difficult tent to be under, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi and India deserve credit to actually have brought together so much energy and focus on the G20, and even though the Chinese boss man will not be here, the very fact that 20 countries and many more will be under the tent is by itself credit to India trying to sort of set a new geo-economic agenda. Saurabh Majumdar.
No, absolutely right, Siddharth. I think what you're saying is exactly what the Indian effort is. You know, it is about global cooperation in these testing times, and the Prime Minister has repeatedly said that India needs to now be at the forefront of getting the world together and cooperate in fighting these challenges. And also by way of this G20, I think India has been able to showcase the kind of clout and the kind of things it has been able to do. For instance, this DPI which we were mentioning is a very big achievement which the other countries are looking at. So I think overall it is a very big effort on the part of the Indian presidency, where they have been able to get together a bunch of these countries who are not necessarily on the same side of the table at all times.
Right.
And I think that is the where Mr. Modi deserves a lot of credit in trying to, and if you see, Siddharth, they have always talked, about the issues which are of global nature,
right,
not about the conflicts. I think that is an important point.
Absolutely, and the Prime Minister did make that point very clear to us during that interview. Viewers, the cover of that magazine was up there on the screen. I would request all of you to go and take a look at that copy of the Business Today magazine, the Prime Minister's first and very exhaustive and detailed interview on the G20 that will pan out just in a few days from now. I'll thank all my viewers and you, the guests, for being on the show. With that, it's a wrap. See you soon.